Hello everybody and welcome to this session. This is a session for the toughest and the bravest. You managed to walk on this wonderful stair up to this building. I first want to thank to our host, the German school in Sigishara, who so kindly offered this wonderful space for us to hold our sessions. You will be all here tomorrow also for the plenary session in the end, the Europe and Austria event. So thank you very much to our hosts and to everybody who attended this. This is a very key question of our meeting. Out of the quality in heritage practices themes, I very much prefer this one, and this is why Stepan decided to entrust me with the moderation of this discussion. I think research is a continuous activity related to heritage, and needs to be encouraged and made more known widely also to the public, to the dissidents, to the local authorities who are in charge of restoration works, in order to be highlighted as a key activity, continuous activity. I'm referring now to, for instance, restoration projects that start with research. And when research ends, when the execution of the project begins, which is nonsense if you talk in a professional group like ours. So research should continue during the works, and so on. This is only one example. I'm sure that our debate will bring up very interesting aspects of this theme, and I'm very happy to start the session by inviting Mr. Grellan Rourke from Ireland, who is Vice President of ICOMOS International, to give his presentation on this issue. Grellan was part of the group that Arminia introduced in the morning that worked on quality on behalf of ICOMOS, but also of the European Commission. It was a very important team effort to establish principles and recommendations for restoration works regarding quality. So, welcome, Grellan. Thank you for being with us. Okay.
Should I use this?
Yes, you have to.
Exactly, of course. How silly of me. So, what I'd like to do, I know we're going to be talking about research, but at the very start, I would just like to explain a little bit about the context, because I think that's really important. I talk about research a little bit in respect to this document. But before I start, I think really we're involved in the process here. And we're moving forward we have our quality principles almost in place. We're working on checklists, but there's other documentation that has to be put into place to make the whole thing more real and understandable for those people who are putting forward projects, for local communities, local groups, for local authorities and regional authorities. So, in a way, this is quite good, because this is the first time since we finished the initial work that we have a forum to talk about these things. So we need to see, we don't know exactly where we're going into the future, so that's good, because it means that I would hope that you will become involved and ask many questions and contribute, because really at this stage, contributing as broadly as possible and as focused as possible as well is important to us particularly, because just to put it in context, this project originally came out of the ICOMOS Europe group, which is basically all of the European national committees of ICOMOS. And we approached the European Union to do something like this. And in fact, our next meeting, annual meeting, is in Lisbon in June, and I'm going to be presenting this to the Europe Group, and hopefully Irina will also be presenting what comes out of this conference, because it's going to be very important in how we move forward. Really, how this has come about is because of the last tranche of funds, EU-funded projects, where some quite upsetting things took place. There were very good projects, but there were many projects where they had an element of destruction or falsification of our cultural heritage. And there were a lot of complaints, and when we went to the European, to the DG Culture to talk about this, it was like pushing an open door, because they had criticism back, and what we wanted to do really was to put a set of principles in place to ensure public money would be used in a very, very different way, and in really a more embracing way. And the mandate of the European Commission has really allowed the creation of the expert group that Arminia referred to this morning, and this was done in the framework of the European flagship initiative, Cherishing Heritage. And this has created this broad framework which will help with the next tranche of EU funding. This large amount of money, is a wonderful opportunity to get it right, and I think to learn from what has happened in the past, and we have a duty, I think, to get the maximum long-term benefits from public monies, to invest in capacity building, to set in place sound frameworks which can remain in place into the future after these projects finish. And I think this is one of the things we need to be doing. We have to support sustainability in this process, develop expertise, empower stakeholders and communities, and by doing so, ensuring supported projects have really a secure future and carry with them a sustainable legacy. The provision of guidance on the quality principles, and there is a copy of this document here, is really, again, as Arminia said this morning, is a holistic approach. But there are regional and local issues: creativity, tourism, quality, education, lifelong learning, social cohesion. There are many, many things which need to be taken on board. So when you read this document, you will see all the many aspects which really need to be taken into consideration in putting forward projects in the future. And I think all of this really is very much an integral part of the essence and vision of what the European Union is about. So one of the things I hope that will happen in this process is there will be a lot more communication between the soon-to-be 27 members of the European Union, and we must see how best we can all work together more efficiently to do these things. The quality principles are only a starting point. And I think the challenge now is to address the realities which are facing us, to create these practical frameworks for member states and their communities, the regional offices, for carrying out these projects. So what we need to move forward with are develop frameworks. So that would be something that we need to talk, we need to discuss today, how best to actually do that. And I think no matter where you are in Europe, you have a diversity of cultural heritage. Whatever corner you've been, there'll be many people before you. So we have such a diverse cultural heritage personally in local areas, and then as you broaden out and look at all of Europe, it's a remarkable diversity of cultural heritage which we have inherited. And what we want to do is, nothing is static. we're going to leave our mark in our age, but what we want to do this time is to make sure it is as positive as possible and as sustainable as possible, and that we're contributing very positively to the future development of our cultural heritage. And I think what's also important is because it doesn't, as was said by a couple of people this morning, cultural heritage doesn't seem to rank very high at international and national levels in terms of funding, but yet with the work that the European Commission has done, it ranks very highly in the mind in communities. I think there was 80% of communities said that cultural heritage was most important. And I think also our methods of measuring our cultural heritage investment need to improve, because in fact it's actually contributing far more than one might imagine, and there were some figures mentioned this morning. I'd like to just move on to our topic of research. And I think it's quite interesting just having a very brief conversation with Irina just before we started, that one of the things that we did look at in terms of research, this is the working group, was that research really is an integral part. Maybe before a project moves forward, there's quite a bit of research that might be there, but we felt that in terms of funding, that funding should begin with completing research, initiating research, so that research is actually part of the process. So it isn't something that you necessarily have to come to the project with, because I think research, certainly DG Culture understand that research is essential, because if that aspect is not well looked after, well curated, you're starting off as a disadvantage in not maybe understanding fully what you are dealing with. Research is about extending knowledge, enhancing our understanding, being better informed, and I think interpretation does play a significant role here. So research is not just about scientific research, it's at all different levels, and we must look at it in that way and approach it in a holistic way. Because we need to know about, in working on a particular project, you need to know maybe the diverse past of that, and not often the complex histories. And only when we really come to terms with those sort of things can we find solutions in moving forward. There are, of course, real practical solutions for conservation experts that have to be, I mean, these are detailed scientific research, conservation methodologies, and coming out of that are really looking at good models for how things move forward. So I think one of the challenges is that it's going to be there at a European level and at a national level particularly, are coming up with case studies and projects which are good models to follow, because it's much easier to look at something which has been successful and say, why has that been successful, and to go down not exactly the same road, but at least to consider all of those things that were considered in those projects. I think at local levels, we very much need to understand traditional approaches and to reinforce and support them and to document them. When you look at, these are the things which are most easily lost, and in many cases, you know, we probably have lost a lot of traditional things. So the research is not just in a laboratory, it's actually looking at the traditional approaches for doing things, because in fact in these type of situations these traditions have evolved over so much time, and their worth is all of the added knowledge that there has been over time in coming up with solutions, and these must be protected. I think indeed even through research one can engage in a wide range of support at a political level and with communities. And I think one of the things we need to do is embrace participatory governance. I'm just going to mention governance. I'm not going to talk about it. It's talked about in the document. It should, I think, be at the beginning of the document almost, because the governance really sets out the whole framework within which to actually approach the project with as much openness as possible and with as much participation as possible. Multidisciplinary research in the field of conservation, heritage and management in Europe is already underway, and we need to see how do we enhance this, but also the question we have to ask ourselves today is how do we share this knowledge among all of us? And this is going to be quite a challenging thing to do. I have mentioned about sustainability and economic modelling. But I think overall research should lead to shared knowledge and better understanding so that we have a sound base to make decisions. Research activity has been made possible by public resources directed towards cultural heritage throughout Europe. And this is one of the, great things I think which is happening in the EU at the moment, is that it's sort of discovered cultural heritage, but what it means is that there's been a lot of focus. Cultural heritage related research areas addressed by the European Commission framework programs such as Horizon 2020 and its successor Horizon Europe, or the Joint Programming Initiative on Cultural Heritage and Global Change, enable significant joint research efforts. The one thing which has come out very much out of our initial discussions with DG Culture has been the realization that there needs to be joined up thinking within the different DGs, and certainly the first one that was engaged with was the Interregio, because there's lots of overlaps in all of these projects, and it's important for the different DGs in Europe to be aware of this and to know when they need to cooperate together. So I think one of the challenges that's going to be facing the European Union, or the European Commission, in preparing the groundwork for this next tranche of funding, actually is to see how they need to work together in their institutions to ensure good outcomes, because it starts there before it moves into the area of the member states and the regions. During the year of the European Year of Cultural Heritage in November 2018, the European Commission launched an online platform of Innovators in Cultural Heritage 33 in a task force on circular business and financial models. Urbinia talked a little bit about this this morning, but there are a lot of initiatives out there, and there are a lot of calls for studies. And the one thing I would say is that one needs to be very vigilant and go online and look. There's a lot of things coming out, and it's very easy to miss so many of these things which may be of benefit then to people, to the individual states parties. And so we really need to address these calls for proposals. But a lot of these platforms really are bringing together researchers, professionals, stakeholders and policy makers to map problems, practices and policy gaps relating to impact assessment and quality of interventions in the European historical environment and cultural heritage sites. Today, the scope of cultural heritage research extends beyond conservation and restoration methods and tools involving management, risk assessment, and potential impacts of interventions on the life and identity of communities. Research cooperation is broadly acknowledged as an efficient way to respond to emerging issues, and there is scope to use these research results more effectively when programming and planning EU funding with potential impact on cultural heritage. And we need a way of helping us all to do this and to move from the quality principles to the practicalities of how to achieve quality results at the end of these projects. I think of central importance is the basic applied research that should underpin programme briefs and calls at national or interregional level. This could be funded as part of EU initiatives. The development of the conceptual basis of programmes and projects requires preliminary studies to be undertaken to achieve high quality applications. And I think one of the things which has come forward very much out of this is the understanding on this occasion that there's going to be a lead-in time. And if you don't have a reasonable length of lead-in time for all of this, you're really not going to get anything right at the end of the day. So front-loading it is really, really important. And of course, research is very important in relation to this. I mean, you don't have this document yet, but I might just, before I finish, have a couple of things to say at the end, but before we pass to the other speakers. But I just would perhaps like to, there's a whole series of recommendations which is going to come out of this, and there are many sections, but I think we have 5 recommendations to in relation to research. And I'm just going to read it out because kind of sets the context for where we're moving forward in the area of research into the future. The first recommendation is to establish an integrated research policy and joint programming on cultural heritage interventions in Europe. And this is something that has begun to happen at an EU level, and this will continue to be funded into the future. The second recommendation is funding should be provided to conduct research at macro levels, so the trends and impacts, and micro levels, case studies and comparison of practices in similar heritage places on the financing of cultural heritage interventions by the EU. All member states should actively participate in the joint programming initiative on cultural heritage. So that's the second recommendation. The third recommendation is to develop interdisciplinary research programs and improve knowledge transfer from the social sciences and humanities field to include research on participatory planning, integrated management of cultural heritage, and the development of smart technology measures. The fourth recommendation is European research on cultural heritage needs should provide appropriate funding instruments for small-scale projects. And this was one of the problems with the last tranche of funding, where the focus tended to be on these large-scale projects. And what we want to do is not abandon large-scale projects, but to encourage small-scale projects and to give communities and regional groups the wherewithal to have these small-scale projects, and a lot of small-scale projects may appeal much more to local communities. The last recommendation is the forthcoming Horizon 2020 social platform on the impact assessment and the quality of interventions in European historical environment and cultural heritage sites should build on the results of the document principles. So I'm just going to say a few more things. I have other things I can say in relation to more precise things relating to research from my own experience, but maybe that'll come out a little bit in the dialogue and discourse which we will have. I think very clearly the research capabilities targeted at cultural heritage needs to be increased, and I know you agree with that, Arena. New methods of cooperation and knowledge transfer need to be embedded in EU funding mechanisms. And I pose the question to you, how do you think we can do this effectively? What also we must do is aim at levelling disparities and enabling quality action. We must use part of the funding to do this. If you look at the huge diversity in Europe, there are some more advantaged areas than others. There's some there's some countries that have maybe advanced scientific research taking place. But we should be looking at sharing more these sort of things and working together and trying to get, in this program, we should be aiming to get a better balance at the end of it than we have now. And I think we, as I said before about good case studies, we need to identify best practice examples. So we need to see how we do this and how we disseminate this. I think it's up to each member state to identify their own areas of weakness, or maybe weakness is the wrong word, but gaps, in order to address this. And I don't think this is something which could be done centrally. This is where all the regions need to work on this, looking to see how they can address their own issues, but in the context of the overall. What is the most effective way then of doing this at an international level, sorry, at a regional level? And again, the framework for that might be a question we could address, begin to address this afternoon. And I think we have to remember at the end of the day, funding support is a finite resource, and we need to use it well, and we need to prioritize. And to bear that in mind, we may have a better chance on this occasion of doing much more research. But one has to be careful that all the funding doesn't go in research and then there's no project at the end. So it's a balance we need to be looking at, which needs to be in our minds throughout. I think just like to say two more things, without research and the broad range of research, we cannot understand what we are really doing and the consequence of our actions. So I would hope that our session discussion might help direct us to define how we can translate our quality principles into practical actions which will be of use to the member states, but more particularly to the regions, the localities, and the communities within the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Grellan. I think this is a terrific work you have done with this group. And it's a document that needs to be transformed into action. So principles converted into real actions. And also, somebody said this morning, I think it was Matteo, to put it high on the political agenda. Also, even if it seems very technical, it needs to be took in by the political dissidents, the ones who are making the decisions.
If I could just answer you in one thing, I would like to pay tribute to Erminia Shakitano from DG Culture, because she was a member of our group, but she is the link into DG Culture and beyond. And her vision, I think, has been quite remarkable, because so many of us are powerless in relation to getting influence within the administration of the European Union. And she has been able to make so many connections in all of this that I think have been, it's going to be a tremendous legacy coming out of this. I would like to say that, in fact, interest in this has grown so much. There are many other parts of the world that are actually interested in looking at this document. And just to say, I think I did mention there is a checklist for selection criteria which we've just done, and that selection criteria will begin to be, it's the start of the focus on the practical for people, but we need to move further than that. And just to say that at the moment, all of this is being currently translated into French, so that once we have the document in both languages, it'll be more available, then it'll be launched probably next month. So you will have access to all of this. So whereas you can borrow a copy and have a look, it'll be very different in a few weeks' time. when you will having this in front of you will be of greater help in moving forward.
It's more than that. It will be more available also in Romania, because we are, our intention is to translate it as soon as possible. So it's going to be published. Like Stefan said this morning, we translated Strategy 21 because we need that vision, strategic approach on heritage. Also, Cultural Heritage Counts for Europe, the report that underlines the role of heritage for society, and its interpretation as a resource, not necessarily as a problem, as we are often doing that in Romania. And this is going to be translated and published in Romanian on our website. Actually, we ordered some more copies of the document for them to be distributed among the participants. All the speakers got the document, but not all the participants. We are sorry for that. We received it very late. But we are fixing that, and tomorrow I hope everybody who is interested will have the thing.
It's not the final, there's a little
Yeah.
tweaking to do, but
Yeah.
it's not going to change much.
This is why we are not distributing it electronically yet. So, thank you, Grellan, again. And I will now invite my colleague Imola Kirijan, who is teaching at the university in Cluj. She is a civil engineer specialized in historic structures and also vice president of ICOMOS Romania. We were talking before this session, and she was asking me, do you think that everybody got the same understanding of the theme of this session? And indeed, research can be very different. If you come from the university background, it means something. If you come from outside, it can be very different. We just had some very interesting research reports on the economic value of heritage, for instance. This is research too, on very, non-academic, in the traditional way of looking at heritage. I mean, it's not about mortars and materials and so on. It's about wider issues related to heritage. Imola is in a very interesting position of being one of the few experts in historic wooden churches in Romania, and I'm handing the microphone. She already has the microphone for this.
Thank you. Thank you. First, apologize. I had the same computer crash last evening. And I started last night to rescue a couple of images because my topic is a little bit different that the other people presented or will present. I am working now at Technical University, but only since 2012. Before I was working as designer, as researcher, as a site supervisor of different conservation sites. And also as a member of Regional Commission for Historic Monuments, I had the possibility to see the projects without any researches. When I read this topic, at the beginning, the organizer mentioned that we won't focus our presentation on innovation, or we will do it at the expense of routine research, as well as research is carried out in order to inform and guide cultural heritage projects or actions, is absolutely necessary and needs to be enabled both before, during and after conservation and restoration process. I want to invite you for a virtual tour in different attic level. I rescued a couple of images, and I hope you will enjoy what you will see. I tried to exemplify the researches conducted during the before, after, and during conservation at the particular part of built heritage I called hidden heritage, because if it's not needed, nobody are going to check the stage of the roof. If an ordinary designer, if we talk about research for conservation or research in the field of heritage, I immediately think about different type of researches like archival, art historian researches, building archaeology, research at different level of historic materials, soil, environmental condition, and so on. And I choose to demonstrate a couple of European funded projects where, unfortunately, the quality of design is because of the lack of researches. In our country, we just finalized the previous restoration campaign between 2008 and 2013, and we have also started a new implementation of projects. If we are traveling throughout country, I think you will see almost one church in a town without tiles and with scaffolding, and a lot of people are working replacing the roofing materials. That image is what we can see in our region. We have more than 21 churches under restoration work, and due to lack of maintenance, the first step was to stop the infiltration of the attic level. And why it's important to go to the roof? I learned from my colleagues from Belgium that the roof structure often could be considered a black box of a building, and gathering a huge amount of technical, historical, aesthetic, technological and material information about the building as such, about the builder, the stage of techniques, development. And if we are going to the roof, we could find a lot of very interesting information carved on the timber, details about the builder, dates, information, technical information like assembly marks, not carpentry marks, the historic roof structure, now historic, but before was built under the ground. They marked the joints, they dismantled and put at the cornice level. This kind of information help us to understand the technological process and understand also the way how they built. We have interesting assembly marks. We have joints using only wooden pegs. At the late Baroque period in our country, the metallic pieces is also used. It's very important to record this kind of details because help us to do the proper understanding and the proper conservation works. And if we are a little bit more curious, we could find a lot of traces showing us how they prepared the timber, and often we could find the transportation packs on the roof. And I think all these are part of the heritage and have to be saved and conserved. How I mentioned, the Transylvanian cities are plenty of restoration sites, and we could find a lot of new improper tiles. The first ask of the beneficiary is to have very new materials. We also have regulation problems because nobody could guarantee the quality for the reused material. If we would like to reuse it, the tiles, we have to have doing a lot of tests to demonstrate the properties of the materials. Another specific approach in our country is if we are working for a heritage building or an existing building, the intervention has to be done using the recommendation of assessment or expertise done by a specialist person. And this person has to be a double qualification, qualified by the Ministry of Regional Development, but also by the Ministry of Culture, and it's very few of expert has this kind of qualification. If we have no access, if we have no light, the research is in the ethic level will be done parallelly with the implementation phase. That means the designer has to be all the time at site and doing the proper research works. What kind of research have to be done in case of timber structure? Even the technical regulation is after the technical regulation is not mandatory. In our practice, we are doing determination of the timber species, determination of the mechanical and biological decay, the level of degradation, and also because we are structural engineering, we are doing deep structural analysis as well. Unfortunately, these details, the end of tie and rafters, could be seen only when we are replacing the ties. Another issue what I would like to mention, unfortunately, because it's not really mandatory, a lot of projects has presented without roof structures. What I think is not a proper way, even if at the 18th century we have a record, but the project, European project, is presented without the roof, and it's a very valuable Baroque original roof. It's Timișoara Roman Catholic Cathedral, and that was the feasibility study stage. And this is a design because they want to increase the tower and they made research, and the designer had no time to copy the 18th century design. We have also a couple of specific occasions when we find the roof structure embedded in the brick masonry when a new level was built. It's a Gothic type roof structure in a house in Sibiu. Many of time to the roof structure we have connected a very valuable painted covered ceilings. If we would like to save this covered painted ceiling, we had a lot of discussion with my colleague, with the restorator, because he would like to add a new attic under the attic for save the ceiling. In our country, at the least last 10 years, team archaeologists started to do also the dendrochronological research at the roofs. And what I shown in this picture is the way how they took the samples for determining the age of the timber. The second using the cutting machine is not the proper one. The other one is a bore machine using one 20 mil drill. We have another specific type of roof structure, and it's very valuable and it's needed to be recorded. It's the fortified church roof structure, and what we've seen is the two timber level with very high quality of timber. Also during our researches on painted ceiling, we find, I think this is the only one, painted roof structure in our region. It was saved. We have the tie beams above very blue painted ceiling. So this is a section of the building. It's a church in our region close to Cluj. A couple of walls was destroyed, and before built another slab. They painted the tie beams, and it was opened roof. The open roof is not common in our region. And what we could see is the one proper intervention during the 1960, using, of course, a lot of reinforced concrete for reinforce the timber structure. They built reinforcement and some on proper props. How I mentioned, we are doing also the structural analysis of the roofs to understand how the element works and to understand the proper conservation and intervention and different element. This is another detail at the same church. We have also these painted elements. That restoration site will start next month, and we planned to open this roof structure to the public if the Inspectorate of Emergency Situation will agree. At the end, I would like to add a couple of problems what we have during the research. In case of conservation of historic building, we have some sources of difficulties doing the intrinsic mechanical complexity of historic materials, because of the heterogeneous material properties, the difficulty of modeling the damage phenomena, and the restriction of sampling materials from the historic structure, and so the high cost of tests and what we would like to have, if it's possible, to have a minimum research works mandatory in case of financed design.
Thank you, Imola. This is a very interesting issue of, we could consider it a study case of a very robust and in the same time very fragile material, which is wood. We have like amazing medieval roof structures that survived, and because of lack of research, sometimes they are endangered. They are put at risk by projects that are not considering them properly. I mean, having a European project without the drawing of the roof structure is quite well, surprising, isn't it, for us in our professional field? So maybe it needs to be written somewhere in the rules that you cannot have a project without the roof structures represented. This is, I think Imola would agree with that. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, please.
No, I'll just be very brief, but I think your project, the earlier part particularly, demonstrates the necessity of having researched through the project. You're going to discover so many things. I think that was really well demonstrated in what you showed us, because you wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise than through the project. So and that information is enormously important, not just for the building, but for the understanding of the development of historic architecture and materials in the area.
Exactly. Thank you, Roland. So I will ask now Valentina Cristini to have her presentation also. Then we will have half an hour for debates after the presentation. So please come here with us. Valentina Cristini is specialized in vernacular architecture and has done important research in various traditional materials. And she's coming from the university in Valencia, and thank you for being with us and accepting our invitation.
It's working, yes. Good afternoon. Before all, thanks to the organizer of this conference. It's really a pleasure for us to join today this such interesting forum. So thanks above all to National Institute of Heritage for inviting me and, well, in general, our research group, Res Arquitectura. Today I represent, to pass the slide is, it's that, okay, yes. Today I represent, well, my university and above all, this group in which I work. I'm Italian. I was adopted, well, in 2005 by the Spanish research group that is half Italian, half Spanish. And, well, the idea today, in the frame of this concept of shared experiences, we just present our work in progress. We would not present a final point or an arrival point of our state of art of work. We just think it could be nice to share with you our experience and maybe search common identities like our group in other parts of Europe. So here you have the team. The directors are Fernando Vegas and Camila Mileto, that today unfortunately cannot come, and here we are, well, a relatively young team of fundamentally architects, because we are involved in the School of Architecture of Polytechnic University of Valencia. Polytechnic University is a quite young university. I mean, this year I think is the 50th anniversary, but it's really, well, I think strong institution in Spain, because at the end between Barcelona and Madrid, our institution must work hard to stay in order to balance, no, this balance between this such two big university. What I want you to explain quickly is at the end our methodology. We try to work in different fields. We try in this concept of research for conservation, we try to cover dissemination, project, publications, and at the end I think maybe this is a way to maintain live research. In this frame, well, I especially centered in conference, activity, courses, seminars, organizations. Maybe do you have, I mean, you have been in contact with these events, or these events have found you? We especially work on, as Irina said, in vernacular architecture, traditional architecture, or Rammed Earth architecture. So we have worked in this recently in these conferences. We have received a lot of awards. It's really a pleasure at the end when your work is at the end recognized by international committees and at the end authorities. And I think it's a way to go straight in this direction and still work to make possible that our machine is working. Here you have some projects in which we have worked, directed by Fernando Vegas and Camila Mileto, pilot project for the restoration of vernacular dwellings in the inner regions of Valencia, or especially I worked in this conservation tower, is an Islamic tower in Valencia, where we have a lot of Rammed walls in southeast part of Spain. So we have specialized in this field. Well, I remember all the pebbles of this dry stone bridge. Was such a terrible work under the sunny climb of this area of Spain, you know, who's working there. But well, these are some examples of our, at the end, work. Today, I have decided with Fernando and Camilla to present you this project in this frame of different activities in which we are involved. Why this project? Because I think it's really interesting to understand how, at the end, research is something that has a contact with society, with unprofessional people, with people that are not just related with our specific field. And this project is 3D Past, living in virtual, visiting European World Heritage. I really like this photo because in this photo you have a kid that is uses his bicycle through, well, you will see, an ancient Finnish village. And the purpose of the project that is led by Escola Superior Galaecia is a Portuguese School of Architecture. We are partner with Florence University in Italy. Try to, at the end, thanks to collaboration with UNESCO, ICOMOS and other European authorities, improve the experience, the real experience in patrimony. What you have seen before is a kid that is really exploring in a live city, in a live contest that is full of patrimony with his bicycle. It's just a symbol of our at the end goal, that is how is possible to make more and more alive this type of heritage for, as I said, you professional but also unprofessional people. So the aims of this project, that is not finished yet, I mean, we are still working on that, are more or less these 5 points to share the quality and at the end the intangible value, the intangible know-how that you have in different World Heritage sites, to explore experience through different dimensions, because you have to take into account that all the school of that I mentioned, you are School of Architecture, so at the end our approach is an architectural one, to interconnect architecture, history and material culture with creativity and technology, to bring to life vernacular and traditional know-how to the new generations through, at the end, technologies, because at the end technologies are there. We must dialogue with technologies. I'm not really so self-confident with technologies, I have to say that, but it's real, we have to deal with them. Yes, to foster and preserve the material building culture of this special site, and to stimulate and improve different sectors that are at the end linked with this heritage knowledge across Europe. So behind these aims, we have these specific aims that each partner tries to develop. It's important to, at the end, distinguish and share the experience on how the dwellings are inhabited and physically maintained nowadays, because I'll show you, we have selected real examples that are really places that are full of life. I mean, these examples that I will show you are UNESCO listed sites where at the end you have still inhabitants, and at the end the approach that you have, like a tourist, like a professional, like a visitor, is that you have a no plasterboard scenery. You have real places where people live, eat, sleep, cry, buy bread, and so on. So, how is possible to extract at the end, to extract lessons from this type of sites for other sites that are under this level of heritage, UNESCO heritage sites? Well, to make this analyze, we have worked in these components. So we have analyzed tangible dimension, historical dimension, intangible dimension for sure, and at the end, in combination with these new technologies that at the end are there and maybe are important to better understand these places. So we have tried to make order at the end between publication, booklets, apps, digital platform, workshops, activities that in these places we can find. So which are the places? You can ask me, which are the places that have been studied and in which we are still working? Here you have Old Roma. In Old Roma, you have the picture of the little boy with his bicycle. You have the villages in Transylvania. So here we have a well-known example that maybe most of you have perfectly studied and well-known. It's a local, Transylvanian case study. Pico Island in Azore Island in Portugal. Later on we have Cuenca. Later on you have Pienza. These quite known and interesting fortified example in Georgia. So these are the examples that we have selected. You maybe can discover that we have always a local national example. For example, in the case of Spain, we have studied Cuenca. Cuenca has been the case study that I've better developed. And Portugal, Azore, Italia, Pienza, and so on. So which are the cases that we have personally studied in UPV? Here you have our examples. What is interesting is, as I said you, that these little cities, because these are World Heritage sites that are not so big ones. I don't know if you can understand me. It's not just a question of dimension. It's a question of, at the end, inhabitants, also maybe media impacts in the society. Most of you maybe have no idea where is Old Roma located, or Cuenca, or I mean, are not so well known in the exterior, maybe places. So one of our case studies is this one that, as I said, I don't want to speak too much about that, because I think that most of you have perfectly idea about the case study. These are the villages that concretely Fernando Vegas and Camila Mileto have studied. So, well, you know at the end the development, at the end the history of these villages, and what we have tried to explore in this case is not just the history of the villages, but better in this short resume. Well, we have made an in-field trip to see really what is happening in each case study, and you have to consider that each case study is or will be analyzed thanks to a 3D scan. So all these examples that have been selected for the project must be at the end visible through our webpage for this virtual also visits. So, well, here example of our data collection, and as I said it's not just the data collection that is so common in architectural survey activities and so on. It's a global data collection. Also focus on the strategies of tourism, documentation, diffusion, to take into account during the visits, well, to talk with different stakeholders, experts, to understand at the end which are the practices that in each countries are developed. And it's really nice because at the end you really understand that through Europe we have many points that are in common, but at the end the cultural approach or also the cultural identities at the end are driving different policies of diffusions and also communication. Here you have some, well, apps according to this study, and also, well, recommendation, technical recommendation, social recommendation, inputs that local authorities are driving in a way or in another, because well, one of the results, as I said, the project is still alive and is not finished yet. What we have discovered is that behind, at the end, the big elements or big monuments that are featuring a place, you have a very richful details that are coming from the houses, the real, at the end, tissue fabrics of the city. So we try to document as much as we can all these type of monumental but also humble, simple example of architecture that are related with. So, well, it's interesting for sure to study the churches, to study the fortified fences, but we have such richful, bigger contents that are closer to these interesting monuments. So, well, going in this line, we try to search for publications, guidelines, because at the end what is richful in this project is to compare which are the guidelines that we can find in Georgia, in Italy, or in Albania. May we find points in common or not? Which are the differences? So I think that, these are some interesting conservation strategies that we have resumed about your interesting activity here in Romania, because at the end, well, you can read it, you have different approaches that are really enriching for the conservation of these alive villages. We have strong points, weak points. I mean, we don't want to make, at the end, we don't want to judge. It's just a question to analyze. So, which are strong points or weak points in each reality that we have studied. Going to Spain, here you have this nice walled fortified city like Shigizoara. In this case, you have a city that has been developed since Roman era between two rivers. So you have a common problem that maybe is quite visible throughout Europe. During the century, the city has grown a lot, and well, no space to at the end build new houses. So the alternative was to make this kind of medieval skyscrapers that you can appreciate in the picture. So Shigizoara, you have the walled fortified historic center on the top of this hill, and down the hill you have the new city. So we have studied in this case, also thanks with PhD studies, master thesis and so on, which are the policies that this UNESCO city has developed through the years, through at the end the web pages, publication and so on. And what is interesting, for example, is that Spain actually is, I think, is one of the countries in Europe where we have high level of, in English is natality. We have a lot of kids. Well, normally families have 3-4 kids, and so it's just a detail, but all the strategies, the policies for conservation are really oriented in educational approach for kids, for young generation, because we have a lot of kids. So it's something that it's a necessity, no? And it's nice because in other countries we have, well, for sure, educational trainings and policies of this type, but not so strictly rooted in kids' activities. So, for example, I think, we have studied, as I said, publication, document, but what is interesting is that maybe this type of approach that in other countries we have not found that, but other strong points, no? So the idea that we try to stress a lot this kids educational training linked with UNESCO sites, with this type of publication, application and so on. So, we have a strong net in Spain between all these UNESCO sites. So you have this web page, if you are interested in, that is about Ciudades Patrimonio de la Humanidad, so a kind of database of all the UNESCO sites that have been listed in Spain. And as usual, I'm an associate professor. We work together in School of Architecture. We have involved students in our analysis. So we have been there with students. We have had done a workshop with local students there. So we have made this type of, at the end, analysis, sheets of research and activities to, at the end, try to understand. I think that one of these simple goals that we can resume of the project is understand and, take the goods, take the good approaches that we can find through Europe in conservation policies. So, for example, problems of accesses or problems of parking that these cities normally have. More details about students' work. In each case study, we try to select, as I said, interesting, monumental, outstanding elements and humble, simple, basic buildings. So, for example, this is a master thesis, just focus on this nice skyscraper, medieval skyscraper. And, well, in this case, again, strategies. What are maybe in this case interesting or not so interesting, or maybe weak points, strategies. And finally, the last case is about Old Rauma in Finland. That is a wooden city center, so we have a collection of 600 buildings and around 800 people residing there. So here you have the picture of this nice boy that is cycling through the narrow streets of his city. In this case, well, again, we have this nice place included in UNESCO World Heritage List, and what we have done in this case is more or less the same process. So I don't want to enlarge too much the type of research. I just want to present you more or less the guideline of the research. In this case, what we have discovered is that, well, you have an incredible richness of variety of local wooden craftsmen, architectural results in carpentry, in finishing walls, in details, in colors, and this type of, at the end, DNA of the village is still fed by a set of activities. I go to the the local craftsmen, labs and schools that have been developed in the village to promote. These are other interesting villages, more or less in this frame. You have the apps to understand better some special building, publication for conservation guidelines. In this case, we are working with another PhD thesis, trying to define in this such huge range of timber constructions, which are the centuries, which are more or less the range of classification that we can discover according the uses, the colors, also the design of the interior spaces of these houses. And what I want to say is that here you have a very alive presence of craftsmen that are still working, these carpenters, plasters that are still working this type of tangible and intangible know-how. You have a lot of events that are involving local people and also tourists to live this type of experiences, these constructive experiences, these constructive workshops, because they have still activities like, in English is paper walls, productions and stuff like that. So in this case we have other type of approaches in conservation. You have seen in Spain this educational kids training approach. Here a more maybe know-how, intelligence, heritage performing through different generations. This approach that is quite normal in craftsmen, the master and the pupils that are improving progressively the passing of the practical know-how. So again, activities, craftsmen that are really a reference for the local community, books for guideline conservation, according to this interesting immateriality that we have discovered in the village. So in the last slides, again, conservation strategies. For example, in this case, we have a real conservation center that is at the end coordinating a lot of activities for tourists as for local people. And well, I think that it's a short voyage towards our experience. I hope to join different experiences, more or less like our case in some colleagues. And in case you are interested, you have here our web page for more details about our work, the web page of the project that I mentioned to you, and our contacts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it was a different approach. I was expecting another type of presentation, knowing your background, your research background. But this proves once more that research in this field is very different. And I want to start the debate with a question to you first. What was the key research question in this type of project for you?
Well, I think that the idea is to, if I have to resume in one word, is a strategy. I mean, which are the strategies, which are at the end different approaches that we have. I think that nothing is good and nothing is bad. No? We have to, at the end, discover and absorb, because I think that in conservation, in technical aspects or in more theoretical aspects, at the end, you don't have, I mean, it's not math, it's not science. You have to, it's just my opinion, you have to absorb, digest, and try to do your best according to a wide range of inputs. I don't know, what do you think?
Thank you. So the debate is open for you all. I'm asking also Imola to join us here in front to answer eventual questions. So one of the microphones will circulate. So please don't be shy. I know people in the room with a research background that justifies me to expect some contribution from them. So feel free to jump in. Please.
Can I ask a question of Grellan? It's probably not to do with research, but more...
And I'm sorry, I will ask you to present yourself, to introduce yourself
Jackie
briefly.
Donnelly.
Yeah.
I'm a senior architect with the Ministry of Heritage in Ireland. And I just want to ask Grellan about the practical application of these quality principles. Like, how will they come to the member states? Do they need to be ratified or adopted at a member state level? Or is there anything we in ministries or in ICOMOS National Committee should be doing to prepare to make sure these get adopted?
I just maybe like to say a couple of things. In a sense, we don't know exactly where things are going at the moment, but the main thrust of this will come from the EU as part of the regulations for the, if you like, for people wishing to put it in projects, communities or member states wishing to put in projects for this funding. This will form part of the rules, so that it isn't a question that these quality principles need to be ratified or anything like that. It's more informal than that. So what would happen is that the applicants for particular projects would have to demonstrate that the projects will be undertaken using these quality principles, and bear in mind that probably there'll have to be some kind of system of monitoring projects, because it's no use in these sort of projects that you kind of look at the project at the end. There'll have to be some sort of monitoring on the way through that the project is developing as was set out originally. So I think really it'll be all there in terms of what comes out from Brussels. But the more practical aspects are the frameworks for sharing research strategies, for sharing information, for sharing good models. That all of this is going to have to be worked out so that information makes its way down. But it isn't a question of necessarily ratifying these things. So the whole idea is that there are so many different types of projects that these are frameworks within which to work rather than strict rules and regulations. But it's a very, very different way forward. And I think it's going to be very... there's an awful lot of information which is going to have to be put out there at the very beginning, and then I think it's going to be, there needs to be a lot more discussion. I think when it comes to what you were talking about, Imola, about the carrying the research all the way through, that how is that going to be done? So I think the greatest onus is going to be back on the DG Culture and the other DGs to actually set out the rules, because these will be the things that will be sent out to potential for potential projects. But we would love at this stage, I mean, if you imagine excuse me, yourselves beginning to, in whatever context you are, beginning to think about sort of projects, what are the things you'd like to see that we could start to actually work in? Are there going to be fora for sharing information about methodologies, about good examples? And there is some information there about those, but it's how all that will be presented. And I think as well as that is the communication of resources and sharing is going to take place. I mean, obviously there are very, very particular things throughout the 27 member states that there will be. But it's quite a complex thing to do if something isn't, if frameworks aren't put into place because you don't know where to start.
Anybody else, or if you want to add something on this? I will, because I can see everybody else is either tired or shy. I will provoke somebody from the public, because we have real researchers here in the room, and I want to point out, for instance, in continuing your idea on cooperation and sharing information on research, that, for instance, the National Institute of Optoelectronics in Bucharest, Roxana is here with us, initiated a very important project, a national one in Romania, to put together a lot of institutions that are dealing with research from different perspectives, very different perspectives, and to create a platform of cooperation in order for us to share this research information and to encourage research and to make it, bring it higher also in the public agenda, but mainly for professionals, of course. So, Roxana, I'm sorry for this.
Thank you so much for such an impressive introduction, but I'm really very happy that you take this chance to explain our approach. Indeed, I'm coming from a very specific research field, as Irina said, from optoelectronics, which allow me to add under the brackets that it's one of the most interesting field of research. It allows us to collect information in a very gentle manner if you are clever enough to to teach, to learn the laser beam, for example, to come back to you with information. So I noticed that already was mentioned laser scanning, but obviously it's not only a large and a very numerous sorts of spectroscopical, spectrometric, laser Doppler vibrometry. Other approaches which are extremely available are not Star Trek nowadays. It's nothing from another planet, are very accessible, are portable, allow us to make a very precise characterization of each body in visible on the top layers, but also in the deep body, or to see defects, to see where they are, to make mapping, and also, and now I'm coming easily to what was particularly discussed before, coming to prediction, which is something extremely important, to make simulation. It's part of the research. We are very happy to collect the data, to characterize an object, a building, a monument, a statue, very fragile objects. We work as well on monuments as on paintings, on documents, on jewelries, and all these informations put in a chronological, at least, scale. We can see the dynamic of the degradation. We are studying the mechanism of degradation. We can see more than was known before about risk assessments, about risk on our exploitation or maintaining or management of some cultural heritage sites. Or such databases are not only for public, not only for to have proofs, historical collection, but extremely important to have fine and precise and very accurate modification of the monument, and to learn us, to teach us, to orient us in our strategy. And this indeed, what probably part of you knows about also a very active mobile laboratory or created in Italy, Molab, but it's there are some others in the world. One of the very famous, it's Art for Art, Advanced Research Technology for Art and Archaeology, which allows us to work on site. We work on monuments of 14th century in Tibet, up to Cordoba and Valencia and other, obviously in Romania too, in many sites. And all these techniques, way to characterize and to make investigation and diagnosis, was very helpful and effective. I like to point here that it's a result of the research from the other DG. This is what I like a lot, what you said. I listened to you, I was quiet, but this cooperation between DGs, and I must say that I'm extremely sorry that it was not such a discussion earlier, or all the time is too late, I'm afraid, because, you know, 9th framework program, it's already in discussion, it's already scheduled, and cultural heritage is not enough represented in this politics. Sorry.
Maybe if I just sort of start with your end point, that I think because we have this dialogue going with DG Culture, it is possible to identify areas where there may be problems. And I think that to communicate that, you know, I think there's some more dialogue possible now which can help address those things. But I think as well, you know, what you're talking about, there's so many things going on, many of us are not even aware of. And I think we would be looking to Brussels to provide either through a series of websites, but where information can be shared, where relevant programs can be put up, so you could actually sort of see what's happening. A particular website for perhaps detailed case studies, and there is information there. But I think that needs to be done at the overall level, because if they want this money well spent, the resources need to be put in place so that this information can be channeled, so that all of us can go to the one place or a series of frameworks to find this information.
Sorry, yes, of
Thank
course. I was specifically thinking to the DG 11, so research and technology, which is not enough active in this, but has a lot of potential. This was the idea.
And I certainly think that, you know, many of them we're not talking to. It's beginning to happen. Now, it's a very good thing, but these things are slow. But at least we're travelling a bit better in the right direction. But it shouldn't stop us from pushing more. Good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for this. So, indeed, all this. The resources should be put together, the knowledge about research and everything. And we just started this platform. The Institute is a partner in this project, and we are happy to do it, and we are looking forward to the results. We only just started. So I think it's very clear for everybody that we need to know as much as possible about the monuments we are dealing with. And research is essential for that, and we cannot protect what we don't know profoundly. So, like Grellen said, we all agreed on already that research is part of the process. I think it's an essential thing.
Yeah. No, I'd just like to add that, in fact, I mean, you have the resource, which are the national resources, but of course, we mustn't forget that within ICOMOS itself, there are national committees that could also act as resources, and there are international scientific committees within the ICOMOS structures which should be engaged to help in this process as well. So that's something we need to do from the ICOMOS side.
Yes, indeed. From the room, some other questions, maybe? I know Christoph Mahat, who is part of the hosting team here in Sigishwara, and I would like him to hand the microphone and ask him about the research in the Hill Church. How important was that?
Well, the research in the Hill Church will be my presentation tomorrow evening. So I invite all of you to listen to me, because I can tell you stories. But I'm amused about what's going on the whole day, because all the papers which are now under development and so on and so on, have been executed, I mean, been practically worked, for instance, at the Church on the Hill here. So, but that's for tomorrow. My question was a very different question to Madame Cristini, because you mentioned 7 villages with 45 churches. One of them is not Saxon, it's a Hungarian one, it's a Székler church, Dörzső, doesn't matter. But did you think about looking for complete documentation, which has been worked out in the 90s? It must exist with photos of the whole villages, not only the church fortifications. They are very interesting, of course, and I must confess that I made the choice to enlarge the position of Biatan with the other examples, but always the whole settlement is part of the World Heritage List. Each settlement, and we have from every house of heritage value, we have only text, photos, of course, also aerophotographs and so on, and that is a research already done, and from this research you can make the next steps. Because from my point of view, first of all, the research should be done to know exactly what is important and where are the heritage values to be conserved for every building. It doesn't matter which kind of building and so on.
Thank you. Well, I have made a quick resume of 3 different cases that we have analyzed, so I just say you that we have done a resume. So inside this survey resume, we have contacted with local authorities, we have searched for bibliography, historic photos, archive data. The objective, the goal of the project is not to be expert coming from Spain about local Romanian or Finnish architecture. Is to extract as much as we can information and to put in common this information. So it's not a survey oriented project. We take into account data collection, but for example, we don't analyze, I don't know, decay. We know that decay is part of ancient architecture, but in this case, the goal of the project, for example, is not to analyze decay problems. They are part of the buildings, but it's another, I think, is another approach. Well, I just want to stress you a reflection. I think that the work that the colleague has presented, our work, different works that at the end we have during these days, maybe can stress a common problem that we have in Europe about research in conservation, is that we have a lot of scattered contributions. And I think that one of our goals in future is to make possible that from Italy we can really know what people are doing, researching, making, thinking, I don't know, in Scotland and vice versa. So I think this is a big goal that we have, because in spite of English, in spite of Google, in spite of everything, we have still problem of, I think, we have still problems of, at the end, putting common results, solutions, or just reflections. I think that this work that the colleague has done to create a platform. Imagine that in Europe, each country has a platform like this one. It will be stunning. We don't have that. So I think that a big goal, is just my opinion, in research is really to make possible to share and understand. I repeat, in spite of English, in spite of Google, in spite of a lot of research.
One more sentence. The undergoing research project funded by the European Union has a special part at the end of the project. The buildings will be digitized, and all this information probably will put in a common platform. This is some new information about this campaign.
This is very important. We actually pushed very much for this to be included in the conditions.
Unfortunately, nobody knows how it will work yet.
But this only solves part of the problem, because it will provide us with a physical design, I mean the physical characteristics of the monuments. But research is not only that. We have further analysis to be taken for each monument. And this brings me to a question I wanted to ask you on how things are working in your countries, because this conference is entitled Shared Experience, so we should put everything together to share what we know and what resources we have, if necessary. And also it speaks about regional specificity. So I want to ask you very specifically, how does it work in your countries? Because the example in Romania showed that sometimes research is not enough included in for instance, in European-funded projects. It's not. There's no time for it. There's no money for it. So it's sometimes
no expert
and no expert sometimes, and sometimes more often that we would like to. It's put aside and it's postponed. And I wanted to know, how is it working in your countries, if possible.
I'll try and answer that a little bit, but when you're talking about gaps where there aren't experts, it's the carrying capacity, and the carrying capacity is to fill the gaps where there are maybe no experts, and then also to bring the knowledge to the next generation, because that's what we need to be doing as well. We've had kind of a mixed experience. Our first tranche of structural funds in Ireland came a long time ago, in the 90s, and it affected a lot of projects I was working on. There was one very large project where we had suddenly the money, and this is the great advantage of the EU, because we would never have been able to do this at a national level. But we we were able to do on a particular project where you had probably historically aspects of the building from over 10 to 12 centuries, which is a very, very unusual thing. But we used that to do a study on the historic mortars, which was very, very interesting. We also then developed that into creating repair mortars. And then we actually then worked with the local technological school to actually analyze the mortars and the strength of them and things like that. So we actually learned a tremendous amount from that. But that's from the 90s, and that's actually influenced that knowledge and process has been used since. So it's part of a legacy, and I think we should be looking at coming out of this next tranche of a lot of legacies which will help us into the future. It isn't just for those particular projects. We will be doing projects into the future. I would say what tends to happen with you kind of look to parallels. So, for example, the situation, you mentioned Scotland, but the situation in Scotland in terms of the environment, the issues, there's lots of historical connections. So we would try and develop that kind of dialogue, so to learn from them. They have a much better system. I mean, they have a lot of money put into technical studies and things like that for decades, and we could benefit from that. So I think you need to look at, you may not call them partners, but areas where there's lots of similarities where you could share things and benefit initially. I mean, it's easier to start with something like that than to look at the whole of the EU and try to make connections. I think the connections are going to be made, but it's going to take some time, and it happens at conferences. It can happen formally, but I'm not saying everything works well in Ireland, but I would like to make the point that the EU funding helped in many ways, and we have been working as well with the help of the EU on apprenticeships and on carrying capacity, which is really important, because we actually, the work we did on the mortars was actually published in Britain, in England, through the Building Lines Forum in Britain. So making these crossovers are important, where you can actually share information and publish, but sharing it at a wider level is always going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, so then investing in research of this type can be beneficial for everybody and for a long period of time afterwards.
Yeah, beyond the project itself.
Valentina.
My perspective about Spain is at the end a foreign perspective, because let me tell you, so it's nice because you always be a bit, I don't know in English, at the end severe with your foreign country. I think that Spain has something good and something that is not so good in terms of conservation policies. Something that is interesting is that all the competencies are led by regional autonomies. So it's good because, for one hand, each region that we suppose is really at the end keen on local patrimony, heritage and so on, is in charge of conservation policies. The problem is that we don't have a central control, because if all the questions are scattered through the regions, we have a problem of a central authority that is controlling everything. We have a kind of National Institute of Heritage in this sense that is balancing these local policies. Is IPC, l'Istituto del Patrimonio Cultural Español, and this National Institute of Heritage that we have in Spain is like you, under the Ministry of Culture. And one thing that I think it's interesting is that they have plans. For example, vernacular plans, cathedral plans, fortified architecture plans, educational training, this training that I say you before for kids and young generation, different plans, intangible values plan and so on. So each plan has a commission of experts, each plan tries to cross between the countries different possible interesting projects or problems or questions to solve, and I think that is a good option to, as I said, to balance this local authorities approach with a national, at the end, support. I think globally it's working.
And regional governments, do they understand this research necessity for this project?
I'll be sincere. After the crisis that we have had in Spain, a huge crisis in construction at the beginning of 6, 7, 8 years ago, progressively Spain, society, professionals are more involved in conservation, in rehabilitation. We have had more attendance to courses. Also, the masters in conservation in university have had more students. So I think that generally we have a kind of consciousness at different scale about the importance of rehab and conservation. Also because I think that it's a kind of shock therapy. I mean, in Spain we have built a lot during the last years. So now I think that it's a kind of necessity to say, okay, well, we have built a lot of residential buildings, above all in the coast, the Mediterranean coast and so on. We have to rest and to take care of other type of architecture too. So I think that in this way, constructive crisis for Spain, in terms of conservation, is a good option, because I think that different scale of population, professional and so on, are more conscious about the importance of conservation.
So further questions from the room? Anybody? No, I put down some notes of your interventions, but I'm not sure I could conclude for good. I mean, this debate needs to be continued during our conference. But indeed, it is necessary to encourage research for conservation as a constant before, during, and after conservation projects. So you cannot say, now I know everything about this and I will stop research. And I'm looking again at Roxana because, for instance, we are monitoring all the time with non-invasive methods, monuments, in order to know how to react to risks, to what happens to them in real time, for instance. So it's really a continuous process that needs to be integrated in European funding projects, as said in the title, in the very title of this document, which is called, because we only said it's the quality document, but the real title is European Quality Principles for EU-funded interventions with potential impact upon cultural heritage. So research or lack of research has a huge impact on conservation, and it depends on us as professionals, but also on the actors on this market that decide things to integrate it properly and more intensively into the whole process.
Holistic view. It's one of the things we discussed quite a lot in monitoring projects, but also evaluation. And not just everything finishes from the project is finished. You have to go back, and that was one of the things we felt was very important, because things may become apparent afterwards, and that needs to be taken on board. So it's a kind of a continuity. Clearly from a funding point of view, it's going to go on forever. But certainly we had this discussion about the importance of evaluation at the end and then into the future and how that might be done. That's probably going to be a challenge, but that was very much part of our discussion and certain aspects of it, just to let you know.
Thank you. Any more additions to this? Imola? No. Okay, so thank you all for this. It was quite enriching, and I will ask you to help us into drafting conclusions on this panel later in the week, in the next week. Thank you. And again, to say that we will translate this document, and we will try to make it more visible and more taken into account where European funding is involved. And now coming back to our schedule in the conference, I'm encouraging you, I'm encouraging you to explore more this room by visiting the upper gallery, which is still preserving the former pupils' benches that used to be here in this room, and well, they eventually have been replaced, but still they preserve some of the historic benches in the upper side of this hall, which is beautiful, with a lot of names from the German culture on the walls. And we thank again our host for inviting us to hold our meeting here. And also, I would like to invite you to walk with us through the upper city towards the lower city, the down side of the city, because we are expected Orthodox Church on the other side of the river at 6:30. So for that, we will all meet at 6 o'clock, 18 hours, at the tower, at the clock tower, citadel. Okay? If I may also give you some advice, if you are walking through the citadel and to the clock tower, please take advantage of the fact that Christoph Mahat is with us. He is a terrific guide of the citadel. I didn't ask him before, but if he agrees, he could give you. Shara, he is one of the best to do it. Thank you so much for everything.